Yo, so if you clicked on this video, you've obviously seen the title and the thumbnail is Bloodhunt FPS boosting. I am going to go through some in-game settings quickly now, and I'll go through some Windows ones after, so make sure you stick around and watch the whole thing. I'm not going to be touching any command line options or any game files. I don't trust the stability of them, so I'd recommend just sticking to some of the in-game settings I'm going to go through, and then after this, when I go through some of the Windows ones as well. So let's start off and let's kick off and let's get into some of the graphic settings. Really quick, I just want to make sure that you guys are subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. If you aren't already, hit that big red button down below and click the bell icon just so you don't miss any of my uploads. Okay, back to the video. So, welcome to the basic graphics tab on Bloodhunt. The main thing to remember on this tab here is that you always want to be running in full screen. Don't run your game in borderless, don't run any game in borderless, unless you're like a streamer or something where you have to tab out quite a lot. It introduces input lag, and for the best competitive experience, you want to make sure that you're running full screen at all times. Make sure you use full screen on Bloodhunt. Next thing, make sure your resolution is set to what your monitor's at. Some people like to go a little bit lower to find a little bit more FPS, but there are other settings further down on this page that we'll get to in a minute that mean you don't have to do that necessarily. So if you play on 4K, you're playing the 4K res or 4040p or 1080p. 1080p is best for competitive right now, just to get your highest FPS. And if you want to pull it down a little bit, you can, but like I said, there are some options further down this page and further in the video that will negate that need and necessity for that. So yeah, just stick to what your resolution is on your monitor, it'll look a lot better. Do not use VSync. VSync is horrid. If you have G-Sync or FreeSync, use that instead. It's a smoother experience, although sometimes I would recommend just not even using that at all. But for the best playable experience as well and the smoothness aspect, you want to be using G-Sync or FreeSync if you have that available, but do not use VSync. Keep your frame rate unlimited. Do not use frame rate smoothing. The game can be a little bit dark, so you might want to crank your brightness up a little bit, but when we go through some settings on the NVIDIA control panel later for the NVIDIA users, you'll be turning things around a little bit with your color settings and brightness in there as well. So just keep that in mind before you come change this setting all the way up to 1 or whatever. Make sure you just keep it at like a sort of steady level somewhere, you know, between 0.5 0.6 for me is where I quite like it. Now, AMD FSR 1.0. Well, what is FSR? So it's AMD's like super resolution, like upscaling software, basically. Similar to DLSS in a way, but I feel like this is a much better application of it. Now, you don't need to have an AMD card or NVIDIA card specific. It doesn't work like that. It works for everyone. If the game has it enabled, you can use it. I believe it's also in Call of Duty Vanguard. And what it does is it lowers the resolution and then upscales it in a way. I don't know how they do it, but they have some magic that increases a bit of sharpening into it as well. You don't have to use any more sharpening filters or scaling or anything like that. All of this is done through their technology. So what I would say though is that if you have a high-end system, you know, a 3060 plus or, you know, a 2070 Super plus, that sort of range for graphics cards, and then, you know, a 3600X or something higher than that for CPUs, you probably don't need to run FSR. You don't need to run resolution scale changing or pulling your resolution down at all, really. You shouldn't have to. The game is optimized enough to a point where you should not have to use those things on your high-end systems. Now, if you have a low sort of mid-end system, you know, you have a 1060 or something along those lines, you might want to turn FSR on and run it in ultra quality or quality. Do not go any lower than that. The game will start to look pretty horrible. Quality or ultra quality is definitely your best friend if you're on a low to mid-end system, 100%. Now, when you boot into Bloodhunt for the first time, you might be tempted to go into your graphics options and just simply go straight away and look at your advanced and set the quality preset all the way down to low. That isn't the best thing for competitive, and it's not the best thing to find the highest FPS. Although it seems like it actually isn't. So here's the settings that I would recommend running with. Now, it might seem a little bit silly to have something where you want to have the highest FPS on high, but view distance you want to have higher. It renders things in further away, which gives you that advantage in game, and it doesn't ruin your FPS nearly as bad as you think it might. It is super effective for competitive, and you definitely want to keep that on high. Next thing I'd go through is the material quality, texture quality, low. Pretty much you want everything to be low or off past this point. You want foliage off, you want ambient occlusion, volumetric fog quality, you want all lighting, all textures, everything low. The game actually looks really good. If you played it before, you'll know the game actually looks really good even with all low textures on. And you don't necessarily miss that experience of it having it on high. But having a lot of these settings on higher, like some of the effects and texture filtering, pushing them up a little bit, can bring down your FPS quite significantly. Obviously, make sure you've got stuff like shadow quality, screen space reflection all disabled, anti-aliasing is all preference. If you'd like to have that a little bit better, you know, visibility where you don't have the blurriness, keep it off. If you don't mind having a little bit of blurriness, turning up a little bit. And if you really want to have that super clean, smooth experience where you lose FPS, though, it is a little bit personal preference, and you do lose FPS. But if you bring it all the way up to its highest setting, that is what you'll achieve with that. But again, you lose FPS, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone likes that blurry feeling. Subsurface scattering off, motion blur off, film grain, chromatic aberration off. You want all of these things off. They don't do anything for you in the game. They look horrendous when you use them. Lens flares, bloom, light shafts, everything off, disabled or low pretty much past this point. The main things to keep in mind is that you want your view distance up high and use your anti-aliasing to a setting that you're comfortable with. Everything else after that is sort of low or off. You know, it is very much turn everything off. It still looks great. Don't worry about it. The game still looks fine. And back to the basic real quick as well. If you need to use FSR in a lower end system to find a little bit more FPS, then do so. What I found on my system with a 5800X and a 3070, I find that I'm on 250 plus to 300 FPS with these settings that I've done and in Windows as well, and I don't use FSR. So if that's a sort of gauge for you, you know, a 5800X and a 3070, I don't use it and I get maybe 250 FPS sort of average. That's where you might want to be looking. So if you have a slightly worse system than that, maybe you want to think about turning it on just to sort of bump your frames up if you're really competitive. But past 144, you're feeling pretty solid on this game, and you don't need much more for competitive. And the game looks great regardless, so yeah. Now, onto the more Windows side of things here. Like I said about the launch options, don't use them. I wouldn't recommend using them. Same with some of editing the game files. I don't recommend changing any of them. I don't think that it's worth the risk of the stability of the game to mess about with these. Some of the settings that I changed in game and also the ones that I'm going to do in Windows now should be enough for you to have appropriate FPS and smoothness in the game. If you do want to use the launch options, I recommend looking into it yourself. There are some to do with sort of telling the game force use all your cores, which can be a bit rogue sometimes, and there are other little options that you can mess about with as well. But only look into them, I think, if you are really struggling and you are trying to squeeze everything out of it, but do so at your own risk. Now, the main thing that I want to look at when we come into Windows settings is this here. If you go in your search bar on the bottom left and type in graphics, what will come up is this. And what you can do in here is you see two options for variable refresh rate and hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. We're going to ignore variable refresh rate right now because we are not interested in VSync or any of that nonsense. What we're looking at is the GPU scheduling, hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. So if you've watched my Warzone video before on the FPS tips I gave on there, I said the same thing I'm going to say now. If you have a lower end system, this is typically better to enable. It is usually always better to enable this, to be completely honest with you. Turn it on, restart your PC. I, however, had an issue. When I played Warzone with this, I had really bad stuttering, and in a couple of the games, I felt that stuttering as well. My general PC felt like it was stuttering a little bit more. Now, like I said, I have a 5800X and a 3070, and I felt those issues. Test it out yourself. I would recommend turning it on if you have a lower to mid-end system anyway. It should be a lot better for you. If you do experience stuttering, turn this off. You don't need to run it. I don't use it right now, and my game feels still okay to run, you know, this super smooth experience and 250 to 300 FPS most of the time in the game. Now, another big thing that I want to go through for your NVIDIA users is the NVIDIA control panel settings. It's really important that you go through and use some of the custom settings in here, so use your advanced 3D image settings on this screen. Go in here and let's start going through some of the settings. Copy all of these. I'm going to scroll through them quickly and I'll go through and explain some of them really quick, but you want to copy these settings. I'll scroll through them for you now. And you can pause the video if you didn't get a chance to see just there, but we're going to go through them anyway. So first things first, image scaling. I'm on, I believe, 512 NVIDIA driver, 512.15. You want to make sure that image scanning is off. We aren't messing about with any of that. If you use FSR in game as well, make sure that all of these settings are the same. No matter what system you're on, these should be the same settings regardless on NVIDIA users. So image scaling off, ambient occlusion off. Any setting that's application controlled is just sort of default to whatever you have in game, and usually that's always off. So even if it says anti-aliasing here is off, in game it will still be on. I think it's just the way that they interact with each other. It doesn't always work the same. Gamma correction on. A lot of these just is very default basic settings. Make sure that you have background application max frame rate off, CUDA GPUs all off. Low latency mode I keep off. Typically when I play games, they usually have the reflex option, NVIDIA reflex in game enabled in boost. This game doesn't have that, but I still don't use low latency mode. You could potentially turn it on and test it out with the program settings, going specifically into the Bloodhunt file and changing it there. However, I don't think the low latency mode option works all that great right now. Don't recommend using it. Turn off your max frame rate because you want that to be as free as you want. If you have G-Sync or FreeSync, make sure that your monitor is using that appropriately if you want to use it. Power management mode is really important. Make sure you set this to prefer maximum performance, that way you're getting the most out of your GPU. Make sure the preferred refresh rate of your monitor is set to the highest available. So I'm on a 240Hz monitor that can overdrive to 280, but I keep it at 240 just to keep it nice and stable, no mishaps or anything like that. Make sure you've got that set to highest available. Copy all of these settings down here from now. A lot of this texture filtering stuff, it all changes in game as well, but for the stuff that doesn't change, we got it set to high performance. Make sure that you've got your optimization trillionaire on. Make sure that your shader cache is all default, stuff like that. Thread optimization on. Do not use triple buffering, then do not use VSync, and turn off the virtual reality stuff down here that we don't really mess about with. Super sampling, we don't care. A lot of these settings are just very default and basic things, but not everyone goes in and changes them. A lot of people just use these image setting preview and just uses the quality and sets it to performance, and it messes everything up. You don't always have these perfect settings where it's, preferred maximum performance or using your highest level refresh rate. A lot of people miss these. You wouldn't believe how many people miss, setting their monitor to the highest refresh rate that they can or having it in the right resolution. Not everyone knows all these things, and not everyone changes them. Not everyone understands that is what you have to do sometimes. You have to change things. Not everything comes default perfect for how you want it to be or how you expect it to be. One last thing I will say for NVIDIA is that if you want to mess about with colors, which I always do, I run 85% digital vibrancy or color saturation essentially in game. It looks really nice on Bloodhunt actually. A lot of the buildings are very dark and dull, so you can bring up the brightness like I said in game. Also you can do it in here as well if you need to, on your monitor specifically, but turning digital vibrance up for me made the game really pop and made it stand out a hell of a lot more. And that's pretty much it for the NVIDIA control panel settings. On a final note, what I did want to add is a general rule of thumb for every game that you play. Make sure that you've cleaned out your task manager, and I don't just mean, ending tasks of stuff that you aren't using right now. I mean also heading into your startup and disabling things that you don't use every day on your PC. You see how many things I have disabled here? I only have a few things enabled, and the most basic things that I use typically day to day, every single day, and I need them to start up on my PC at the same time. Make sure you go through this and disable things yourself. It's really simple. You just right click and enable, or you click and go down to the bottom right corner. Make sure you get rid of anything that you don't need. Pause them, disable them. If come in here, if you have anything open right now that you're using, a lot of it just saps away at performance. I'm not even doing anything right. I'm recording a video and I'm using 6% of my CPU and 25% of my memory, and I have 32 gigs. Like, a lot of things just sap on your PC, just sap performance. And when you're playing a game, you'll really notice it if you have a lot of things open that mess up how much free resources you have on your PC. Make sure you go through your task manager and task on things that you aren't using, and make sure that your startups have got everything disabled that you don't use typically in your day-to-day. And so yeah, that is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you leave a comment, let me know if any of these work for you. Let me know if you have any tips yourself for Bloodhunt, or even any of the games that you have good Windows advice for. I know there are a lot of options you can go through and optimizations you can do, but at the most basic level, trying to keep stability of the game and trying to make it as smooth as possible and stress-free as possible for people that don't already know what they're doing with the Windows settings, or even with the in-game settings, just making it as simple as possible to go through and make your game feel as good as you can without wanting to mess it up or feel like you're messing it up. Just let me know in the comments if you've got any more tips for people to use. Let me know if you found the video useful. Leave a like, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.